then you can do your remaining preparations. Okay, so tomorrow we'll cover this DHCP and DNS, then this servers and services part will be completed tomorrow. Okay, this is a look like a small topic, but to understand this, all earlier things what we discussed is important. Like about work group, about a domain or a domain controller is important. So where is our picture? Here it is. As I said, this is a domain controller, right? This is a domain controller. It is a server. And how it is become a domain controller, that is important, right? So how it is become a domain controller. So domain controller, it's right. It's like this is actually a Windows server. Operating system wise, it is a Windows server. In this Windows server, there is a role called ADDS, Active Directory Domain Services. So this Active Directory is a kind of a service. It will provide two services. This Active Directory is providing two services. Okay. So in your Windows server, if you install this ADDS role, you're installing ADS role, then it is become domain controller. You install ADS role and configure it. So already I told now install and configure. So install ADS role in Windows Server and you configure it as a domain controller. Then it is a domain controller. See three steps. You take Windows Server, install ADS and configure it become domain controller. Okay. So this is a database. What database? Active Directory database. Okay. So where are we again? Yeah, you take a Windows server. Look at, I have a Windows server. Still, it is booting. Again, rebooting. Okay, maybe it is facing some issues. I have for some practicals, I have done some additional things in it, so it is gets undisturbed. And I'm going to close this client system. And we'll let it boot. We'll see. So again, I take a one Windows server, install ADS role inside, and I make it as a domain controller. Okay, understand that point, first point, the domain controller part. So we have a domain controller means it's a server, it's a Windows server. Install ADS role. It's become domain controller. Understand guys, that part. Which part? This part. Okay. Okay. Now I'm speaking again. Okay. Started again, smilers. Okay. So as I said, ADDS. What is this AD? Active Directory. AD means Active Directory. Okay. So this Active Directory is what is I installed is Active Directory. So this Active Directory service is called a directory service. This Active Directory service provide directory service. Two services it will provide. So as a domain controller, when we are discussing about a domain controller, I told two things are in a domain controller. One is database, another one is authentication and authorization. So when you this, how it is provided? Because of Active Directory, two directory services. One is database service, Active Directory database service. Another one is authentication and authorization services. Active Directory database. Directory service means directory. It's like a telephone directory, which contains information, right? Telephone directory contains information. Yes. Okay. Just like that, it's an Active Directory database. Directory is Active Directory means it's a directory database. Active Directory database, which contains information. What information? user, group, computer, services, resource information is there in your database. In what domain controller we seen, right? Active Directory, that is database, domain controller database. Which database? Active Directory database. Okay. So what is the database contains? Users, groups, computers, services, and resources. Part one. Second part. So whenever these users in the database, the users are domain users, log into domain computers, accessing domain resources. In that time, this domain controller, in the domain controller, this Active Directory service, it will authenticate that users, authorize the users to access, authenticate users, and authorize user to provide access permissions. So, okay, Active Directory authenticate users when they log in and authorize the user to provide an access permission. These are the two services of Active Directory services. What is an Active Directory? So, Active Directory is Microsoft service. It's a directory service. Two services, Active Directory database service and authentication and authorization services. Active Directory database service means users in Active Directory database contains users, groups, computers, and resources in the domain. Authentication, whenever these users or a computer, any object is required authentication and authorization. So that authentication authorization done by Active Directory. So Active Directory provide authentication and authorizes the users, groups, computers, and resources when they log in or accessing kind of stuff. Okay. So I want to log in. So as a user, I'm logging. It is authenticate. I want to access a computer, authorize. I want to access a printer. This is like a resource, right? It is like computer, printer, both are resources. I want to access the resources. So I need a authorization. So these two things will be done by our Active Directory itself. Okay. Guys, understand. So straight question, guys. What is Active Directory? Straight technical question. Okay. Active Directory database, NTDS.DIT. NTDS.DIT is you have a database, means its database name is there, no? There is a name, file name is there. Active Directory database file name. Active Directory database, the file name is NTDS.DIT, New Technology Directory Service Directory Information Tree. Okay. And Active Directory provide authentication, right? One is database. The database file name is NTDS.DIT. And Active Directory authentication process, right? So that is done by protocol called Kerberos, and also to use LDAP protocol also. Authentication protocols. Okay. Second one, that is. Third one. Again, we'll come back to Active Directory, guys. Okay. We come back to the Active Directory. This Active Directory services, Active Directory role or a service is introduced in Microsoft Windows Server 2000. It's a Microsoft service. Active Directory is a Microsoft service. Active Directory is a Microsoft service introduced in a Windows Server 2000. It is also available in 2003 also, 2000 and 2003 servers. But in 2008 server, the Active Directory name is changed to Active Directory Domain Services. Active Directory name is changed to Active Directory Domain Services. As I said, ADDS. ADDS or AD, both are same. The only thing is in 2000, 2003, it's Active Directory, and 2008 onwards in Active Directory Domain Service. Now it is 2022. 22 server is there. Means still it is Active Directory Domain Services. Okay. That's the thing. So understand difference, guys, AD and ADDS.
Yes, sir.
So instead of it is, I put a AD is a Microsoft service. Active Directory is a Microsoft service introduced in 2002. And ADDS is name changed here. So earlier it is before 2000 server. So there is a concept in the NT server is there, Windows NT server. In Windows NT server, actually this domain controller concept is introduced. Domain controller concept is introduced in Windows NT server. Okay. So in that time, so there is, it's like here, this is a symbolic representation of domain. When I draw this thing, like the systems are connected, meaning is symbolic representation of systems are connected in the network. It's not about bus topology or like that. It is about systems are connected in the network. Okay. It's a triangle. It's a symbolic representation of domain. This rectangle is a representation of domain controller. Okay. So this is my domain. For example, this is some Tata domain, first Tata domain enterprise, and this is a domain controller. Domain controller. Again, okay, this is a Tata organization, for example, started business, right? Started a business with a Tata name, right? So then there is people working in that organization. So they have their computers, domain controller, authentication is going on. So Tata started another business. Tata started another business, separate organization. For example, Tata's TCS organization. Okay, so this is a TCS domain, and there is a domain controller, TCS employees, TCS domain controller, their authentication, separate organization. Then Tata started another business called telecom services, telecom related services. Okay, okay, Tata Telecom. Okay, telecommunication. So the people who are working under Tata Telecom Services, their employees, their computers, their username, their authentication, separate domain. So I'm all talking about same domain controller and authentication in the Windows NT time. So that time there is no Active Directory. That time it is SAM database, not Active Directory database. They use SAM database. And authentication is NTLM authentication. That time it is NTLM authentication. So organizations are increasing like this. But thing is a point here. So one point only. So there is a people, for example, the user in this Tata organization need to access a resource in TCS. A TCS user need to access some information, some resources in Tata Telecom for certain purposes. So what you have to do, you have to create a trust relationship between these two domains and trust relationship between these domains. Trust relationship between like this. Okay. You have more organization means more trusted relationships you have to create as per the requirement. See, it's become less secure because every time you have to create a trust relationship, sometimes one way, sometimes two-way trust relationships, you have to create it. Okay. So Tata Motors company again. So this TCS want to access Tata Motors information. Again, you have to create a trust relation between this to TCS to Tata Motors. So like this complex trust relationships you have to create it. And it's not under one kind of organization wise. It's all about net bios naming conversions, not as a DNS, FQDN conversions. We don't get it. It's all about a net bios kind of naming conversions. Like Win server, we use it. Okay, means net bios naming conversions. Organization wise, it is not there. One second. Hmm. So this is bolder way of NT10. So in 2000 server, this Active Directory architecture is introduced from Microsoft. All are Microsoft only. Active Directory architecture is introduced. Okay, Active Directory architecture has to be is introduced. In this Active Directory architecture, so that is completely changed. It is they introduce a forest and tree concept. So this is called a forest. Forest means enterprise, Tata enterprise, for example. So in this forest, I created a domain. It is a first domain I created. So not any domain. So I created a very first domain I created in this forest. And I put a name of this forest is tata.com. The domain name is tata.com I created. This is a domain controller and this is the tata.com. So this is called a root domain. This is called a root domain. So this is forest is created automatically when you create this first root domain. So my forest name is tata.com automatically. Okay. How tata.com is created? By creating a first root domain. After this, again, my business is expanded. So what it is? I got tatamotors.com, TCS.com, okay, like that. So different organizations are came up. So this is a tatamotors.com, TCS.com, tatasteel.com, vistara.com, okay. So different uh, domains are created under this forest. So these domains we call it as a tree domain. Okay, these domains we call it as a tree domain. The tree domains is created under a forest. And there is a subdomains also there. It means under under any domain, it can be under root domain or under a tree domain, you can create some kind of subdomains. Okay, so those subdomains we call it as a child domains. Child carry a parent. For example, this is HYD Hyderabad dot tatamotors.com or electrical.motors.com. Okay, cars.tatamotors.com, trucks.tatamotors.com, like subdomain, sub part. Okay, so everything follows same kind of schema, same kind of stuff, but every individual user having a individual domain having individual user database, individual computers are there. Okay, so this part is like a child domain. Okay, so this architecture is introduced, okay, in the 2000 server, that is what is Active Directory architecture. In this one, we have a forest, root domain, three child domains are there. This is a boundary. This forest is a boundary. See, a boundary. Means in this one, automatically all domains in the forest trust each other. It does not allow other domains other than our forest related domains. Access is not allowed directly. Okay. So that is another one forest kind of stuff. Okay. It is a security boundary. That's called a security boundary. Okay. Within the forest, the domains are trust each other. So you don't need to create any trust relationship between them. Okay. So this is, and this Active Directory is introduced in 2000. In 2003 also it's Active Directory. In 2008, in 2008, this Active Directory become ADDS. That's only Active Directory Domain Services. Active Directory Domain Services name is changed. Okay, guys, understand anything? What is Active Directory? Active Directory is a Microsoft service. Active Directory is a Microsoft service introduced in Windows Server 2000. This Active Directory is changed to Active Directory Domain Services in Windows Server 2008. The Active Directory provide directory services like database and authentication and authorization services. Active Directory database stores identity of users, groups, computers, resources, and service information. And Active Directory authenticates users. So when they log into the domain computer. Okay. So authentication and authorization. Next point. This is important. Up to here is answer. Okay. The last one is Active Directory database. So there is a database file name that is NTDS.DIT is a file name. Active Directory authenticate users, authorize users. So that protocol is Kerberos protocol. Okay. And Active Directory architecture is contains forest, tree, child, root domain kind of concept it is. In the forest, all domains are in the forest will trust each other. So that is important. So of course, this part is if you want to add your Windows system to the domain, your system must be Pro or Enterprise versions only, not a home editions. Your laptop we can't join into the domain because it's a home edition. So if you are using Windows 10 or 11 Pro or Enterprise editions, then only we can join into the domain. If you join, then only it is part of domain. Otherwise, it's not a part of domain. Okay, that's it.
Yes, sir.
Compulsory, guys. Active Directory is the most common question. What is Active Directory? What is ADDS? Most common question. Difference between work group and domain is also one of the most common question. So that's why I'm giving big explanation, slow and repeated explanation. So please go through it and tell your other guys to do it. Okay. So tomorrow we'll see about